seen him at a Mela Masterclass. We're happy to have you here, and we'll look forward to welcoming Victor back again and again. So with that, Victor, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody. I'll try to keep it, you guys know me, right? It's going to be to the point, a lot of content. Here we go. Okay. So what I want to do is start out with, for those of you who've seen me before, the first part of this will be very familiar, but like anything else, right? You need to hear things a couple of times just so you'll get it in your brain. So let's begin with the basics, which is, I always tell people when it comes to selling or presenting, the biggest thing you have to remember is that we all think alike. We all make decisions alike. In other words, if I can understand how the brain works, and I always start there because I think that is the starting point of any conversation, whether it's presenting or selling. Now, let me be clear. When I say selling, I have to remind people, I'm not talking just about a product or a service. Not just that. I'm talking about whether it's a product, a service. Maybe you're trying to sell somebody an idea. Maybe you're trying to sell your boss, I'm giving you more money for your budget. Whatever it may be, you're trying to sell yourself in an interview. Selling really is about how do you project and how do you understand the other person so you can position yourself better. So I'm going to give you some strategies, but again, bear with me if you've heard this part before, but again, it's essential to start out with the brain. So let's go to the brain. Because if we understand the brain, again, we can understand anybody in selling. Regardless of culture, you can understand people's brain. And so I always use Daniel Kahneman's model. And this one I've drawn out many times, so it probably looks familiar. And that's the brain. And the phrase they use, they call this the triune brain. And what they're discovering using fMRI machines, you know, where they scan your brain to kind of see what's going on inside, that we often think it's about left hemisphere, right hemisphere, right? Right hemisphere, creative, right? Left hemisphere, logical. But what they're finding out that that's not really an accurate model. What you're finding is that it's more of a triune brain. You really have three parts of the brain. So, for example, just wait. Yes, I have a brain in my studio. That's a brain, right? So most of us think it's like this, you know, left and right, right? That's what we think. You didn't think you'd see a brain on this show, right? But you're going to see one. Anyway, so what happens is if you look at the brain like that, right? That's kind of what you're seeing here. It's the brain. And this part, there's a middle part here, the limbic system and the amygdala down here. So let's walk through what the brain is actually doing. This right here, the prefrontal cortex, this, we'll put L, so this is brain. You guys see me do this before, brain. This is the logical part. This is the prefrontal cortex, right? So that's the prefrontal cortex. Then, right here, you have what Okay, I'm back. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes, we can.
All right, so then there's the emotional piece, right? That's the limbic piece. And then the last part, which I think is the most important part, is the survival part. So there's the E, and then there's safety, right? This brain is all about safety and survival, right? Now, when you're talking to this brain, well, Daniel Kahneman, he won a Nobel Prize in economics for this model. He said basically is that we typically make a decision with system one, this part of the brain, and then this is system two. He called it, I'll just put S2, system two. Most of our decisions are made here. Now, what's interesting is, if you want the brain to pay attention to your message, and again, whether it's face-to-face or video, it doesn't matter. What people want is that if it is a message, it has to be logical, but it also has to be very simple. Now, we've all been to presentations where people put a lot of stuff on the screen, right? Like 100 bullet points and or different graphs, and your brain doesn't know where to focus. The power of presenting is to be able to do things simply. Notice what I'm doing to you right now. Notice what I'm doing right now. I'm giving you a simple model. It's a very simple model that you can use. And so logical, emotional, selfish. I could get more complicated, but I'll keep it simple because I want you to what? Get it. The emotional piece, it has to mean something. That's a heart, right? This is where we lose most of the sales or presenting. It's safety. People need to feel secure when they hear your pitch. Remember, what we're doing is asking people to change. That's what selling is. When you're presenting something or like pitching an idea, trying to get more budget, you are trying to convince people to change. And when you try to convince people to change, this part of the brain, the amygdala part, this primal side, starts to alarm. because it feels like, okay, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So keep this model in mind. This is your brain, and our job is to sell to the emotional part and make the client feel secure. And we're going to talk about what happens when you're trying to sell a customer on change and why they resist. But it's important to remember that this part right here, sometimes have you ever done a presentation? Let me just pause here. Have you ever done a presentation to a client, to your managers, to your leadership, and you logically laid everything out? It was very logical, right? And at the end of the presentation, they say, well, let us think about it. Let me get back to you. Let me talk to my committee. Let me talk to my boss. But they never do. They never move. And in your brain, you're thinking, but wait a minute, that was so obvious. I laid it out logically. The thing is, you won here. You got the logical part down. But somewhere here, the emotional impact is what held them back. And we're going to talk about how do you move people forward when they're, like, again, stuck in their head. So keep this model in mind. We have to sell the emotional piece, right? What does it mean to me? Why should I do it? But more importantly, you got to make them feel secure. This is where trust comes in. And you guys see me do this model, right? That sales is always about certainty and anxiety. That's the balance in everybody's head. And our job is to raise certainty and reduce the anxiety. Keep that in mind, okay? So we got this model down. We start with the brain. Remember, we got to make it mean something. And if it doesn't mean anything, people pull back. That said, we understand the brain. Now let's take a step back. Let's take a step back. When you're going into a meeting, when you're going to go into a conversation with somebody, you're going to start at point A. That's you starting your conversation. Your goal is to land at point B. That's where you're going to finish your conversation. Now, the distance between here and here, let's say that it's a 45-minute presentation. 45-minute presentation. Now, it's important that we start here. Once you understand the brain, this is where you need to go to. My question to you is, before you go into any presentation, before you have any conversation where you're going to sell something, and again, selling is beyond product service, could be idea, you get a vision, a goal, more budget, whatever it is. My question to you is, what is your ask? In other words, what are you going to ask for when you get to the end? The thing is, you should start with the end in mind. What are you going to ask for? Now, there's several things you can ask for. One is you can ask for the sale, right? You're trying to sell them a product or service, and you're going to try to get their commitment. That's one thing you could ask, right? The second thing you might want to sell is, I'll call it the next step. So the next step means that maybe the next step could be is that you're in there, you're presenting, you know a decision can't be made, so you're presenting to this person, person A, but you know that there's a committee behind that person. So your goal, if I can sell person A, then I want to sell them on the next step. In other words, what's the next step? So my question to you is, I want you to think about this. What is your ask and how do you ask for it? This is important. Most people don't do this. 67% of salespeople never ask for the order. They go through the whole presentation and they never ask for the order. So my question to you is, when you're presenting something, one of the first things you do is ask yourself, what's my ask? What do I want? Now, this is called outcome-based selling, right? So think about, I want you to, in your mind right now, think of a situation where you're going to sell something, whatever it may be. Maybe you're an entrepreneur, right? You're trying to build your business. You're trying to sell investors on giving you money, right? Maybe that's the first step. That's your ask. Then, if that's your ask, how would you ask it? In other words, what's your asking line? So for example, if I'm trying to close a sale, my favorite closing line is, based on what I've shown you, which one of these two options fits your needs? Based on what I've shown you, which one of these two options fits within your budget? Based on these two options, which one are you comfortable moving forward with? That's my line. That's the one I always use. And so my question to you is, what is your line? Here's why I'm saying this. Because you want to begin with the end in mind. Because if I know what the ask is, if I know what I'm going to ask, then my job now is to what? Reverse engineer my presentation. Now, this is important because, if you read a lot of sales books, they teach you about learning 100 different closes, right? like, 100 different ways to ask for the order. You don't need 100 different ways to ask for the order. You just need one. And if you know what that is, that question that you're going to ask, and you know how you're going to ask it, then our job is to figure out a way, almost like an airplane. We want to land right there, right? You ever see those, the people who walk on those balance beams, the people that, the gymnasts who walk on the balance beam? And remember, they do their exercise on the balance beam, right? And then when they dismount, they have to, what they call stick the landing. When they dismount, they have to stick the landing. Now, what you have to do is, when you get to the ask, you have to stick the landing. The ask has to be clear. There's no hesitation. Too often, you see it even on video conference calls. You ask somebody a question, they go, yeah, I think we can do that. And you just hear that simple, yeah, we can do that. That little hesitation, yeah, we can do that. Or how about this one? You're going to ask for the order. Say, okay, so, which one do you think you want to go with? And the customer hears all this, yeah, which one do you want to go with? What that does is that it alarms this part of the brain. This part of the brain goes, I'm being sold. Or when you hesitate to answer a question like, yeah, I think we can do that. You ever see people do that? You ask them a question and then they look off and they go, yeah, I think we can do that. And immediately this part of your brain goes, I don't believe him. I don't believe him. That's why it's important to know what you're going to ask for at the end. Am I going to ask for a sale? Am I going to ask for a next step? By the way, some people also call this a commitment. In other words, you want them to commit to another meeting, going to the next level, whatever it may be. Now, having said that, now that you know what you're going to ask for, then we got to work backward and say, what do we present? So then we get here, it feels very natural and we stick the landing. Okay. So let's talk about how do you begin to set up a presentation where you can communicate with people. Now, what I'm going to do is I wrote a book a few years back called Sales Model. No, I'm not going to sell it to you, but I will send you a copy. So what I'll do is, Rania, I'll send you a copy of the book, PDF files. And this book has 50 different sales models. Now, let me explain what I mean by a model. This, for example, is in the book. That model is in this book. And for me, what I've learned is over time is I can't remember a lot of formulas or processes, but I can remember models. And models help me frame my conversation or how I approach the situation. So I will send Rania a PDF file of the book, and then you guys can go through it. So I've shown you one of my models in the book. The second model I always like to show because this is like the universal, and I call this literally the universal sales formula, right? The universal sales formula. Now, you may think that's a big claim, but it's not. Every sales model, every sales process out there follows this model. I just simplified it so we can understand it. So the model's very simple. E plus E plus E. And if you've been to my Mela programs, you've seen this before. You're seeing it again, and you should know what it is. If you don't know what it is, shame on you. Just kidding, right? So now, the first part, now remember, let's set up a situation. We've set up a call via video with the customer. Or when we get back to normal, we're in a room with the customer. It could be one or two people, doesn't matter. But we're ready to have this conversation. Now, I do a lot of coaching, especially in the last month. I was telling Rania, I've been on the webinars a lot, doing a lot of coaching. And here's what I'm starting to realize. When I really walk people through a sales process, and I listen to their sales pitch, by the way, when I listen to their sales pitch, what I hear is that they're trying to get to the sale real quick. They're trying to sell too quickly without going through the first part. So what is the first part? This is the empathy piece, right? Empathy means you got to take time to understand the customer's business. So if you're selling B2B, let's say you're selling, I don't know, a SaaS platform, right? Software as a service, some type of platform, a CRM, doesn't matter. Some high level network equipment. Before you can even talk about your equipment, you need to understand where the customer's at mentally. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. If you're selling B2C, it's a transactional sale. I've often hear this. I walk into a store and people say, can I help you find something? And I'm like, no. We all say that, right? We all go, no. No, can I help you find something? No, thank you, right? Because it's a horrible question. But what if somebody walked in, let's say you're selling, I don't know, you have a flower shop, right? You have a flower shop, right? And if somebody walks in the door, instead of saying, can I help you find something? Maybe just ask a different question like, what occasion are we celebrating with flowers today? Right? What occasion are we celebrating with flowers? Now you're trying to understand why they're in the store. So give you a third example, business to residential, to selling to homeowners. Again, when you get to somebody's home and they're looking to put in a new roof, we don't just try to sell them a roof right away. We try to figure out what is it that they liked about the roof, didn't like about the roof, and what they wanted for the future roof. So the empathy piece is really strong here. You got to take time to understand. And I joke that there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is I logically understand what you're going through. Empathy is I feel it. Sympathy is logical. Empathy is emotion. You feel it right here. You really understand. So if you're looking at, I'm going to come back to it. If you're looking at how to be a great salesperson and sell like this, remember, in order to understand clients, you have to understand three things. You have to understand your product, right? You have to understand your product. You have to understand your product, but you also have to understand the client's business. That's the client's business, right? You have to understand their business, and you also have to understand what's going on in the market. And right here, that part right there is where we sell effectively. If I know my product and I know their business and I know what's going on in the market, then this right here becomes my conversation. And if I take that there, this is now the conversation I want to have. And I'm going to come back to this, okay? But keep in mind, know your business, know their business, and then know the market. Like that, you're having a different conversation. So if we're starting out with this conversation, how do you start a conversation being empathetic? Now, there's two schools of thought here. The old school of thought is you go in there and you ask the customers a lot of questions. You ever see people do that? They come into your office. First of all, people come into your office, or if they're meeting you virtually, there's a lot of rapport building, right? A lot of small talk. You know, tell me about your family, tell me about this, tell me about that. And the thing is, imagine that if you're a CEO and you have 10 calls that day and everybody does that to you. Small talk, talk about the family, talk about what's going on. It gets tiring. And then they move into asking a lot of questions to the CEO. They've now wasted a good 5, maybe 10 minutes. What I consider the most valuable time in any presentation is the first 5 to 15 minutes. That frame right there is where the money is made. In other words, where decisions really take hold, where the preferences are formed, where you condition the buyer in the first 5 to 15 minutes. So if you're going in and you're going to do a presentation, if you're going to get online and do a presentation, the last thing you want to do is spend time, what? Asking questions and trying to be nice. So what do customers want? Notice that when I got on this call, aside from the introduction Rania gave me, did I talk about myself? No. Why? Because you're on this call because you want information. You want me to share something with you that's going to help your business grow. And then if I give you that information, you're going to go, I kind of like this guy. If you've seen me already, you already say, I like him already. But if you've never seen me before, the first time you go, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. Maybe I want to listen. What's his name again? Oh yeah, Victor Antonio. Notice you don't talk about you or your company. You first begin with empathy. You talk about their problems first. So when you go in to any presentation, what if instead of asking a lot of questions, what if you spend the first 5, maybe 7 minutes talking about their problems because you already know them. You're going to talk about their issue. Imagine me walking in and I say something like this, Mr. Customer, you know, everything was normal 2 months ago, but then what happened? We had this event. What was the event? It was a pandemic, right? And we're still going through that right now. Because of what's happened, I've talked to people in your industry, and here's what they're going through. Here's the first problem they're facing today. Here's the second problem they're facing today. And here's the third problem they're facing today because of what's going on. If I spent the first 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes, just doing that, everything was normal because of this pandemic, right? And again, take the pandemic out, right? Take the coronavirus out. It could be a change in regulations, a government shift. It could be a new product introduction, new competitors jumping into the market. It doesn't matter. There's always an event that tries to disrupt their business. Your job is to understand that event, right? So if I understand the event, now I say, here's the problem. Companies like yours are having these problems, because I talk to a lot of companies. They're also having problem number 2. They're also having problem number 3. Now, if I do this, again, within the first 5 or 7 minutes, and I'm right on point. First I said, what's normal? Here's the event. Here are the 3 problems companies like you are facing right now. And then I say something like this. Does this sound familiar to you? Is this what's happening to you? And if the customer goes, yes, that's exactly what's happening to us. What did you just do? What did you just do? This right here is pure empathy. This is pure empathy. You've just transmitted, not by talking about yourself or your company, how big your company is, or how many degrees you have, or how many patents you have. I don't care. But when you can understand their problem and they go, that's exactly what we're going through, Victor, you've just built instant credibility, because now you're talking about you're talking their language, you're in their head. And now, believe it or not, they're willing to listen to you because they know that you understand them. Imagine we've had these presentations where people talk to us and they go, you know what? I was in a similar situation. We had a gentleman come last year to do our roof. That's why it's fresh in my head. And so we kind of told him, I think we're going to develop a leak. We want to prevent that from happening. And he didn't want to sell me. He goes, well, before we even decide to do that, let me go up there and look at it myself. We're like, all right, go ahead and look at it. He went up there. He says, you got about 2 years on this roof. You can do it in 2 years. You don't have to do it right now. He says, but may I suggest the following? For the last, I can only imagine that in your situation, every time there's a rain, you're wondering where the leak's going to happen. And you're also thinking that if we have a leak that we don't detect it, your beams are going to start getting rotted. And, again, we're going to have rot and the possibility of mold is going to get in. And he went on like that. Is that what you're thinking? We go, yeah, that's exactly what we're thinking. And at that point, we knew that he knew that what we were thinking about already. We could wait 2 years. We kind of knew that. We could wait a little bit. We knew it was getting there. And we said, no, let's do it now. And so once he understood us, and he says, I understand you. I understand your mindset. Then he shifted to the second position. Now he's shifted to, once he knew that, he did the review, he understood. Now, the second piece is the education piece, right? This is the education piece. People always ask me, how would you break this up? If this is a full presentation, this is a 45-minute presentation, by the way. This is that 45-minute presentation I was talking about. I should have clarified. This is point A, and this is still point B, okay? Still the same thing. And so if I've empathized, this right here, this could be about, I don't know, I'm going to guess 20 to 40% of your presentation. Now you say, wow, 40% of my presentation, that's almost half. Well, here's what you have to learn, is that sometimes in selling, you have to slow down to speed up. What do I mean by that? If you can build the trust up front, you can build the credibility, position yourself as a trusted advisor. People understand that because of what you're saying, you're a domain expert. You get it. You understand it. If you take the time to build this credibility up here, the rest becomes easier. And again, you can play with the percentages because every presentation differs. But then let's move now. I understand them, right? So now I understand them. So I'm going to tie it all together. This is the AB. Remember the brain? So now, because I've empathized with them, I've hit the emotional piece. This is pure empathy right here, right? This is pure empathy. I get them. The brain registers that. Now, what I want to go for? Yeah, the logical side. Lock them in. Emotionally, I got them. Now, I just got to what? Logically convince them. So I go back. Now, we go back to this one right here. Let's do the education piece. So the education piece is what? The second phase is you moved out of the understand, we connected, we understand each other. Now you're ready to present your solution. Here's how we can help you. So for example, let's go back. Everything's normal, right? There's an event. It's created problem 1, problem 2, and it's created problem 3, right? Customer says, you get it, Victor. And then I could say something like this, and that's exactly why I wanted this meeting with you. That's exactly why I wanted this meeting with you, because I think we have a solution you might be interested in. And if I did this part right, I can now introduce my solution. They're ready. In other words, The dirt has been prepared. You know, when you're planting seeds, you got to prepare the dirt. The dirt has been prepared. It is now time to sprinkle some solution seeds right here. And if you do this correctly, when you get here, here's where you begin to educate the client. Now, when we educate the client, let's think about it. What are they interested in? Remember, we're always in their head. If you're in B2B, what are they interested in? Every CEO, every executive, doesn't matter what country you're in, doesn't matter. They're only interested in three things. Now, three things, that's it. Now, let me go back. I'm gonna do a B2B example. Remember this thing? If I understand the product, I understand the client business, I understand the market, here's where I wanna sell, right? So that's my little triangle there. And there's only three things people in a B2B situation care about. How can you help me increase revenue, reduce costs, or expand market share, right? Those three things. That's what they care about. If I know my product, I know what my client's going through, what their business is going through, I know the market conditions, then in my presentation, when I get to my solution, I'm gonna bang away at expanded market share, reduce costs, increase revenue. Said another way, again, I'm selling a CRM system, a SaaS platform, whatever, some type of software application or platform, right? Their hesitation is to switch over. So I have to give them a big enough reason. If I can show them how using my platform can help them increase revenue or expand market share or reduce costs or all three, that's my presentation because this is quantifiable. So I call this is another model I call the Value Trinity, okay? And that is in the book also, okay? So that's in the book. So this is something to keep in mind if you're selling B2B, okay? Now, I always get the question, Victor, what if we don't sell B2B and we sell B2C, right? We for example, we sell a service or we sell coaching, you know, something that isn't a tangible product. If you're in the B2B range, you can still tie it to increase revenue, reduce costs, or expand market share. If you're selling B2C though, business to consumer, you got a different triangle. It's the same thing. You got a different triangle. So the thing is, they want to know how your product or service will help them financially, how it will help them physically, right? And then how it will help them psychologically. Let's go through this real quick. If you offer a service, right? Again, we're talking B2C, right? If you're offering a product or a service, people want to know, well, how is that going to help me? If I buy this, I don't know, this Intuit program to do all my accounting, how is that going to help me? Well, financially, you'll be able to what? Track your money. Psychologically, you'll feel good because you'll know where everything's at. Typically, our anxiety comes from not knowing where the money's going. So that's going to help you psychologically. And because you're not stressed out, that might also help you physically. You can do this with almost anything, even a watch. Let's say you want to buy, somebody comes in there and want to buy a watch, right? You say, now, how can a watch fit in here? Easily. If somebody has worked many years and they come into your store, maybe it's not so much the money. Maybe they're buying a watch psychologically because they feel they deserve it or it's a special occasion. Or maybe they just got a promotion. So financially they can't afford it, but they also psychologically want to let people know that they can afford it. Anything can be maneuvered. So again, if you're talking B2B, increase revenue, reduce costs, expand market share. If you're selling B2C, people want to know how it's going to help them financially, physically, or psychologically. I'll go back to my roof example on the B2C just to really drive this home. We didn't have to put the roof up, but financially, we knew if we didn't and that thing started leaking, we would have more damage that we didn't know. So financially, we may be in trouble. Psychologically, we would always be worried, right? And psychologically, we would always be worried. Physically, I don't know if there'd be a physical toll, but I know there'd be a financial toll and a psychological toll on my brain. And it's how we use these levers. B2B, increase revenue, reduce costs, expand market share. B2C, physically, financially, psychologically, how does that product help or impact us? That's what you need to keep in mind. So back to the model again. If we're when we get to the solution piece, remember, this is empathy. I'm sticking with the same formula. I'm not losing myself. Empathy. Now we're going to move into the education piece. You're going to present your solution. And then if you do it correctly, you're going to show how your product can solve that problem, how it can solve that problem, and how I can help with that problem. That's what you're doing. And by the way, if you can tie it to increase revenue, reduce costs, expand market share, all the better. For example, you present your solution. It's a SaaS product. Then you say, look, by implementing our system, you'll be able to track more clients, which means you'll be able to narrow your focus on who you market. In other words, you can be more targeted in your marketing. That reduces your cost. With our SaaS platform also, because you can tag certain users who've bought in the past, you can obviously do some upselling and cross-selling. Now we can increase your revenue, and we can identify, if we have all the data in the database, we can identify similar clients, a certain profile of clients they'll buy, which will allow you to market to a new target audience, expand market share. Get the idea? Now, here you're presenting a solution, but you're educating them at the same time. You give them information they don't have. You explain things, how it's going to help them, and you begin to quantify with numbers. So when you finally get to your solution, now let's get to the last piece. So this is empathy. This is the education. Now, let me emphasize something and slow down. When I talk about education, obviously talk about how your product or service is going to help them. But you also need to talk about insight. I call information beyond the obvious. In many cases, customers don't know a lot about your solution or what your solution can do. Or maybe they haven't thought about a certain situation. When you have a customer go, I didn't know that. Really? You can do that? We never thought about that. I didn't know we had that missing in our platform. So if we did this and we did that, you mean we can do this? You go, yeah. That's the education piece. That's why you have to know your product. Because if you know your product, your service, what it can do, this is the information you give clients. And if during the education phase, you can say things like that, did you know this? They go, no, I didn't know that. You also could do that, wow, I didn't know that. That's when you know you're really educating the client. Because if you tell them what they already know, you're not positioning yourself as an expert. You're trying to find information they don't have. That's what you're trying to give them. So keep that in mind. So stepping back, if I can understand their situation, position whatever I'm asking for, my solution, and then quantify how it's going to help them increase revenue, reduce costs, or expand market share, then I'm in a good position. Now, here, let's take this out of selling, and let's just say we want to talk to our manager. Let's say we got a meeting with the CEO, I don't know, the VP of sales, whatever it may be, the VP of, you fill in the blank, of operations, the chief information officer, and you're trying to get more money, more budget for something, because you want to grow your business unit. It applies the exact same way, First of all, you're going to have to empathize with what they're going through. For example, if I'm talking to a VP of sales, or let's just say I'm talking to purchasing, one of the things I understand that many people are asking purchasing for money. Is that a safe assumption? I think it is. And purchasing is overwhelmed. Is that a safe assumption? I think it is, right? And purchasing has to be very meticulous, very detailed, and very selective in which project it chooses. That's true. And they also have to be able to report at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, to their boss and explain why they approve certain projects and if they worked out or not. So keep that in mind. If I'm selling to purchasing, I got to get into purchasing's head. Too many people asking for money, too many projects to consider. I don't know if they're financially quantifiable, and I got to justify them at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year. If you know those are the four things that the purchasing department is thinking about, okay, now you've empathized with them. Now imagine that your presentation begins like this. You're talking to purchasing. It says, look, I know that right now you have about probably 20, 30 or more projects on your table, and the last thing you want to hear is about another new project. Would I be correct in that assumption? What do you think they're going to say? Yes, you would be, Victor. And would I also be correct in assuming that budgets are tight, you don't want to let go of money, and you really have to financially justify anything you do? Yes, Victor, you understand me, right? And at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, you're probably going to have to justify these, so you better have a good argument. And the project I bring you should have a high probability of success. Is that a fair statement? What do you think they're going to say? Yeah, perfect. Understanding that, I got something that fits all those 3 or 4 criteria. And then I shift into the education piece. So as soon as I acknowledge that I understand them, it almost gives you permission to go into the education piece. And then that's when you educate them on the solution. Talk about how it's going to help the company grow, how it's going to increase revenue, reduce costs, or expand market share. And then if you do this correctly, and they're with you. Now remember, we're trying to get to point A all the way to what? Point B. And point B was the third E. So the first one was empathy. I'm rewriting it just to be sure. And then I said from here we go to education. And then my favorite is the empower piece. Now, I personally think that 80% of all sales are done about right here. If you do this right, if you do all this right, the sale here becomes, I don't want to say easy, but it's not that hard, right? I always say selling ain't hard when you know how, because if you know how to do this, when you get to the proposal, it's always like, you know what the question is going to be. I asked you about that. So now you've done the education piece, and now you're going to offer some options. Now, I use the word empower because nobody wants to be pushed into a corner. So what I often do is I give people options. And I always have that question, based on what I've shown you, which of these two options best fits your need? Standard line, works every time, because people have to make a selection. So if you're presenting, for those of you who've been to my workshop, you remember the hamburger? I always do this example. If I tried to say you one hamburger, a single hamburger versus a dual hamburger, that's a hamburger with two slices, most people would choose which one? This one. Why? Because when you present somebody with two options and they don't know you, there's no trust, there's no track record, we haven't had a relationship, people will always choose the cheapest option. Happens every time, happens every time. But what if I want people to buy this option? I can try to pressure them into buying this one, right? Just pressure. You want the big burger. And again, if you see my workshop, the answer is you what? You offer 3, right? Because immediately the way the brain works, remember, your brain is always trying to minimize risk. It's the way we're wired. It's always trying to minimize risk. And so what you want to do, the brain will say, this is too big, this is too small, why don't we just go with this? What does this have to do with you? Everything. When you get to a presentation point, again, you know what you're going to ask for. You have to ask yourself, how many options are you going to present? May I recommend 3, if you can do it. 2 at minimum. Never just go in there with 1 option. Always go in there with 2, optimal being 3, for this reason. If you present 2, they're more likely to go with the small one. If you present 3, they're more likely to go with the middle one, which means you should always figure out what you really want and put it in the middle, and then add other things to make a bigger one. So for example, if you're looking for a new platform, X platform to invest in, you're going to say, look, we can go with the cheap platform, and that's going to cost us $10,000 a year. We can go with this right here. This is $15,000 a year. And then this one, I think, has everything we need. It could be $35,000 a year. Immediately, the brain says, I'm not spending 35. 10,000 might be not enough. You know what? Let's just go with the one in the middle, which is exactly the one you wanted them to buy. And so notice again that as you're doing this, let me zoom out now. Let me zoom out again, okay? Let's go back to where we were trying to go to. Here's B, here's A, right? It's a 45-minute presentation, as I said. And again, whatever the presentation, it's 45 minutes. I know what my proposal is going to be. Option A, B, and C. That's why when you go to websites, ever go to websites and they always have like 3 options, silver, gold, bronze, right? So same thing, 3 options. I know what my proposal is going to be. I also know how I'm going to ask for that. Now think about this. If you know what the proposal is going to be and what you're going to ask for, if this is possible, by the way, some of you may be thinking, well, Victor, I don't know. Sometimes I don't have the numbers fixed. You can come up with a budgetary estimate. Anybody can, okay? You can figure out a budgetary estimate. So maybe these are 3 budgetary estimates. But if you can get a full proposal, great. You have the proposal. You know how you're going to ask for it. So now you just have to work backwards. And you know that somewhere in here, this is the empathy piece. You got to do some educating. And then the empower piece is the option right here. And that's how I would begin to do a presentation. Now, as you're doing this face-to-face, but more importantly, as you're doing it through video, because that's the question I've been getting lately. Victor, well, how do you do that? Once I got that down, how do I do it through video? What you have to do, here's a simple rule. I want you to keep this rule in mind. 45 minutes, right? I want you to think of every presentation you're doing, right? Just every presentation. This is not exact, but you'll get the idea. Every, let's say, 3 to 5 minutes, you ask a question to see if they're still with you. Every 3 to 5 minutes, you show them something. By the way, let me go ahead and show you this. Right? That. Or every 3 to 5 minutes, you ask them to participate with you in something. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you? Yeah. Or you can ask them another question. Based on the numbers I've shown you, does that fit with your market projections? Whatever it may be. But what I'm doing is I'm planning that every 3 to 5 minutes, I'm asking questions. It doesn't have to be one question. It could be a couple of questions, whatever it may be. But what you're doing is you're going, stopping, connecting, going, stopping, connecting. And if you can do that throughout the presentation, it'll be more effective. As I always say, this is important to keep in mind, the average salesperson, and we're all in selling, the average salesperson practices what to say. The best salespeople practice what to ask, because in asking questions, that's how you can guide a customer's mindset. So keep this in mind. It's good to know what you want to say, but also keep in mind that by asking certain questions, you begin to what? Move the customer's brain around. I mean, literally, if the customer wants to go this way, all you have to do is ask a couple of questions and it begins to shift their brain to where you want them to go. If I want a customer to buy this product, but they're thinking like this, my job is to ask questions that will guide them to my answer. So hopefully this will give you at least a formula of where to go to it. I think I wanted to do one more thing, and we're almost out of time. Give me 5 more minutes, and then we're going to do about 10 minutes of questions and answer, okay? Because I'm always asked, Victor, so how do you connect with people? How do you know how to talk to certain people? So I'm going to give you this model. It's a model that I have adjusted from several other models. Like, for example, there's a company called Miller who actually created a model on personalities. The problem with these models, like the DISC personality and stuff like that, it's too complicated. My brain can't handle that. I'm just like a simple person. And so, but they also have models for understanding who you're talking to. Let me explain, because I know I'm not clear. Let me walk you through it. I want to stop and talk about personality types and motivation. Why people buy and why they don't buy. So I want you to write this acronym down. Just write this down with me on a piece of paper. And again, I'll just use a B2B example. In a B2B example, you typically have 4 types of buyers. Here we have, we'll call this the economic buyer, right? Economic buyer. That's usually purchasing. That's the economic buyer, right? Then we usually have a technical buyer. This could be like the chief information officer, the chief operations officer, people who have to deal with the technical part, right? Anything production, whatever it may be. Then I think a buyer that most people never think about, but is very important, is the user buyer. So if you're selling something to a company, let's say it's a product or a service, whatever it may be, you're going to have to deal with people who use it or will use that service. So there's the user buyer. And then obviously there's the management buyer, right? And these will be like, we'll just call them the CXOs. It can be the VPs, presidents of company, but the higher up. Now, management buyers have what? Would you say, what's their focus? What's their focus? It is profitability. It is, as I say, increase revenue, reduce costs, expand market share, but that's profitability, right? But they're also thinking what? Long term. Hopefully you agree with that, right? Long term. What is the user thinking about? I'm trying to sell a new platform to the company. They're used to using another platform. What are they thinking about? First of all, it's going to be easy to use. Will it make my life easier? Easy to use, make my life easier, and will it work? That's what they're thinking, right? The technical buyer, what are they thinking? Well, if it's a platform that has to be integrated, they're going to get, do I have to, how will it integrate? How much training has to be done? And how will that impact any type of production I got going on, right? So that's what they're thinking about. The economic buyer, well, they have a one-track mind. And this is the only track sometimes I think they have. They're thinking what? Total cost of ownership, money, 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 money. What's it going to cost, right? So if you're going into a meeting and you don't know who's going to be in the meeting, always keep this in mind, that you're going to have these 4 types of buyers in the room. Now, you may not have all of them, but sometimes you do have a nice mix of them. And then as you're presenting, you're doing your point A all the way to point B, you need to really address these issues. So in other words, for the management, you really need to talk about how your product's going to help them be more competitive in the market and also be more cost effective. That's what they want to hear. And they also want to hear that long term, this is where the market's going. This is what people are doing. Users want to know how easy it is to use and how they can integrate it into their daily lives to make their lives easier. Technical people want to make sure it's upgradable, expandable, upscalable, whatever it may be, it fits, and it's not going to impact any type of delivery or production. And then the economic buyer, again, they're going to be focused not on price, but like total cost of ownership. Well, what's this really going to cost me over the next 3 to 5 years? And is it really worth it? And if this is not embedded in your presentation, then you'll lose one of these buyers. So it's always good to keep that in mind, okay? So I think we got about 10 minutes. And Rodney, I'm gonna pass it. I could go on, but I think I'll leave it there because I think I can go on. It'll go on for another half hour. But anyway, Rodney, I'll go back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Victor. We do have a great lineup of questions. Roba she pointed out when you were mentioning the brain model, she was reminded of the Greek model of modes of persuasion, the pathos, logos, and ethos. And she's asking, are these modes of persuasion more relevant now in the current environment than ever before?
What a beautiful question. I sincerely mean that. What a great question. What's happening now is that every product in the market is almost the same, right? And so the quality is expected to be the same. And I'm just talking from a US-centric point of view. And so what's happening today is something very interesting. Buyers are confused. And so there was a time where relationship selling was the thing. But I think over the last maybe 10, 15, 20 years, relationship selling has taken a back seat in many cases to the people buying online, not having to deal with salespeople. But something interesting is happening here. And this goes back, I'll say, to the ethos part of it, is that what's happening now is that people now, because there's so many options and everything's almost the same, we're coming back to relationship again. They want to connect with people. And so you can logically, be as smart as the other person, but what people want to feel is that connection. That's why the first part of the empathy is key, because people now want to connect with people who understand them because there's so many options. And if you think about it, that's how you buy. If you go online to Amazon and you're looking for a product, what's the first thing you do? I say this all the time, my time in the workshops, is that we go to the reviews right away, right? And we read the reviews because we're trying to find out, is the product really aligned with what the reviews are saying? And then as soon as you emotionally connect with somebody who has a great review and you have a bunch of those, mentally you buy in. It doesn't even matter the brand anymore. I mean, if you think about it, you just buy in. So I think the ethos part is what's really moving to the front now. I think I've answered your question. Great question, though.
Great, thank
That's
you.
an
Bobby,
intellectual question.
Yeah, that's adorable. Bobby he's keen on knowing if you're personally finding it harder or easier to sell your products and services in this current environment, and what new approaches have you discovered when restricted to engaging virtually?
Virtually. So what's happened is, I'll give you my business model, and then I'll tell you what happened in my business model. So I do a lot of speaking, right? So that's that, right? And then I got a learning management system, the Sales Velocity Academy, right? And then I never did a lot of webinars, didn't do that. And then there was some coaching here, right? Coaching. That was it. That was my business model. And literally like 90% of my business was here. Not more like 80%, if I really look at it, 80% was here, right? So then along comes this event, right? And I'll go to red because it needs red. This just died. Just nuclear winter, everything, just gone, right? So immediately my brain said, that's not good, right? So this is all gone now. And so what I immediately started doing is I started shifting my attention to these three over here. And what's been interesting, and then give me Bobby's questions one more time when I finish this part. I want to make sure I answer. I started marketing my learning management platform more. I never promoted the webinars. So now this is becoming a bigger revenue generator along with my coaching. So all of a sudden, this has gone up, that's gone up, that's gone up. This is still trying to recover. I think I've booked maybe one event for the rest of the year. But what I'm discovering is because I've some people say they redoubled the effort. I've like 5 times, 10x that thing. And so all of a sudden, this has become a very healthy model for me, to the point where I don't know if I want this anymore, because this is all travel. Now I'm generating revenue. So this month, I think we're going to have another record month on revenues here. But I've had to, Ronnie, we were talking about this before we got on, right? So I've had to redo my studio, add all kinds of stuff, invest a lot of money, because it's all about perception, right? Whatever's in the frame, I call it frame casting. Whatever you're casting in the frame is what people will judge you on. And so when I did my other webinar, that no-touch selling one, I got into, you know, how do you set up your studio? And how do you begin to look more professional as we sell online? The question is, what can you sell via this medium? And so I now found out that going virtual with services has been very effective. I actually I don't know if I answered Bobby's question. Can you ask that question again, Ron?
Yeah, Bobby was asking, it was a 2-part question, asking if you're finding it harder or easier to sell in this environment, and what new approaches have you discovered when restricted to engaging virtually?
Okay, it is harder to figure out, if that makes sense. I don't want to say it's harder. Of course it's harder, but it's harder to figure out. And so what I've been doing, Bobby, is just trying different marketing strategies. If you go, one of the strategies I've been using that's been working is if you go to my YouTube channel, right? We got, you know, you're going to see that I've done about maybe in the last 2 weeks, like maybe 15 live events, different topics, 15 live events. And I think that's impacting my sales, because I'm doing these free live events on YouTube, and that's pushed it up. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm a 10x this thing, kind of like 5x, is I just invested in a new platform called Reframe.io. Reframe.io lets you go live to YouTube, but also LinkedIn, Facebook personal, Facebook fan page, and I've discovered Twitch, which is a new platform that gamers use. And this is the stuff you learn when you're trying to figure out, okay, how's this all shifting? And so it's a new platform we're actually going to start, you know, marketing to millennials and Gen Xers on those platforms. So that's caused me to rethink everything. So I think that should answer the question. So it's just different, figuring out.
No, that's great to know. And that takes us into Sam's question. He wants to know, what do you do with people who just won't engage virtually? Clients, customers that they don't want to get on a virtual call. They want to get a phone call either.
Yeah, just turn off the camera. That's what you do, man. Just screw you. Turn off. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. There's a lot. Here's what's interesting is that most people's default is not to turn on the camera, right? They don't want to turn on the camera. But here's what you can do, because here's what, and by the way, this is not my opinion. I think it was HubSpot that did an interesting study. Said when people have their cameras on, he says, when you ask them to turn it on, again, US-centric point of view, 8 out of 10 will do it. But maybe the reason they don't want to turn it on because they're just not prepared. They didn't know it was going to be a visual thing. So what if before you get on the call, like as you're setting up the meeting, hey, by the way, we'll do a Zoom call, and I usually record these via video. So find yourself a cool place to be at. I joke about it because it's better for us to have that conversation. You'll get more out of it, and so will I. And then I'll send you a copy of that recording so you'll have that content. Does that sound good to you? They're usually like, sure, sounds good. Now I prepped them to say, hey, you know, fix your hair, you know, find a nice background, and then go. So if they don't want to engage, then I would have to ask why. In other words, is this a serious client? And by the way, you know, remember, even without video, we're used to the phone, right? But we want to get them on video because there is a connection there. But you can also, one more strategy, I've used this one. I said, we also need to go on video because I'm going to show you something and I need a board to show you on, right? Now, you don't have to have this. I have another whiteboard where I just write stuff and I'll have to draw things out. So let's get on video. And typically I say, well, you can be on video. Do I have to be on video? Like to see your reaction, see if you like what I'm saying. You know, you can just have fun with it. So I don't know if I answered your question, but the majority of people, for me, almost everybody, as soon as I said, turn on the camera, they're like, sure, bam, turns it on. Because I told them we're going to do a video Zoom. And by the way, maybe in your subject headline, something simple on your subject, here's your video link. Just by putting video link, you're letting them know it's not a meeting invitation, it's a video link invitation. Live video link, one-on-one or something like that. Just condition them to think that way. Good question though.
Sweet. So Manel is asking if you would give any advice to nonprofit. Are there any tips and tricks that you could use in terms of selling and persuasion or fundraising in that case for nonprofits and NGOs?
So I've been doing webinars, as I mentioned, and I've discovered, just something fascinating. You're going to love this. Now, by the way, see what I just did to you? See, I want to pause so you just see what I just did to you. Oh my God, I found something. You're going to love this. Immediately your brain says, what did you find, Victor? Even though you didn't say it, your brain said, what did you find? Now, back to the presentation. I did find something. So I talked to, I'm working with a pool company, right? Let's change that, right? So I'm working with a pool company, a window company, right? And a car company, dealership. 3 of my clients in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Now, my question to you is, I'm gonna call this one 1, I'm gonna call this 2, 3. Which one of these do you think is selling more online today than before the virus? If you think it's 1, hit 1. If you think it's 2, hit 2. If you think it's 3, hit 3 right now. I'll wait, Rania, and then just feed me some of the results.
Everyone's saying 1.
Really?
It's all 1, yeah. Pools. Some 3s are coming in, cars, mostly 1s.
Perfect. See, smart group. By the way, see what I did to you also there? Did you catch what I just did to you? If you did, let me help you out. I could have just talked about these 3, but I said 1, 2, 3. Give me a 1, give me a 2, and everybody's like, right? Because everybody can hit a 1. Anybody can hit a 2, 3. What I did is I just created the engagement to be so easy that all you had to do is select the keyboard, and that's exactly what you did. That was a moment of engagement. See what I mean? All right, but here's what's fascinating. You'll also notice that the majority said 1, right? What color is number 1? Evil. I know. You do this to people, they're like, oh, really? And so your brain naturally gravitated to that. That's why now I changed colors. Now, what's interesting is you're absolutely right. This one, I'm working with a company out of Arizona. They had to shut down, like literally take down all their Google ads because they could not keep up. This is like right now it's happening. Company selling windows, crazy numbers. Average sale up 22% per order. Car sales, less salespeople, more sales per car. They were selling 6 cars on average per salesperson. They're now at 20 cars per salesperson. See, something has happened in the market, and that is that virtual used to be kind of this side strategy. Here's main strategy, face-to-face over here. And what you're starting to see now is that it's more acceptable. Think about it. 2 months ago, 3 months ago, the majority of people didn't know how to use a Zoom call. Now they're like, sure, I'll get on the Zoom call. Is it a PC or on my phone? What do you want to do, right? Even people who are 50 years and older, everybody knows how to do it. But the fact that all these 3 are now selling more. The pool industry is interesting because what's happening is that people are saying to themselves, you know what? I'm not going to be able to travel. I'm stuck at home with these kids. I'm going to put money in the house. And now people are investing in their houses. I guess beyond pools. I mean, so somebody's buying something. People are spending money. So that's what's interesting. So did I answer the question?
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Wasim wants to know, what do you do in terms of connecting with the audience and, doing that great rapport when you're in a formal setting, like a B2B pitch in response to an RFP? How do you mix it up, but also, in a formal setting without making people uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's almost like people always tell me that, because I do that all the time, even in the most formal settings. The last one was with Manal in, where were we at, Manal? I think it was, I forget, was it Oman? We did the Oshram, Oman, and we did the Oshram. And so I'm doing the Oshram event, right? And I'll just give you this, I'm gonna answer your question, but so here's the stage, just give you a visual. Here's me on the stage, right? And then here's the audience. These are all chairs, just a lot of people, right? All the way to the back, just real deep room. But this is probably a cultural thing. They then set up these chairs in front of the actual stage. They set up these chairs and they said 2 rows, all the way, right? 2 rows. And this was for dignitaries. just dignitaries, right? And I'm like, as soon as I saw this, I'm like, no, I hate this. Why? Because this creates like a wall, because everybody here is serious, right? Bear with me, I'm gonna answer your question. Everybody here was serious, right? And this is not my audience. You know, I don't want to talk to these people. I want to talk to who? These people. So what I did was I took it as a personal challenge to try to make them smile from the stage, these 2 rows, and it worked. They started smiling. In fact, some of them wanted, when they smiled, they actually bowed their head because they didn't want me to see them laughing. They would just go, and then they look back, but I knew they were laughing. And so my point is that part of it is just being natural. I think people who try to speak at this level are insecure. That would be my first big answer. So the thing is, sometimes, one, we're so insecure that we think we have to behave a certain way. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, there's certain etiquette, right? Got to be respectful of the audience every time, right? Got that. We're in a business environment. Understand that. Everything is professional. But at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable with who you are presenting. And so typically when I see presenters, I see 2 presenters. Usually I see the person that presents on stage, in this case, in front of a group of executives, and then I see the person that's more relaxed outside. And if there's a way to blend that onto the front, you will be amazed at how that presentation will go so much better. It will go so much better because the thing is, when I've done these Mela events, not so much Mela itself, but when I've gone to events in that region, whether it's the GCC, or some of these areas, even Saudi Arabia, when I did Jeddah, I tell the story how the first, they had 5 American speakers. And I remember that the first 3 went down in flames. They were very formal, and it's just nothing. The crowd, it's like 500 people from Saudi Airlines. Oh, can I show you something? Wait. They were so cool. They gave me a plane. Yeah, look at that. Saudi Airlines. That's a promo for them, right? And so the first 3 speakers went down in flames. And so I was like, oh, what do I do? And I remember that, and I forget her name from Mela, she took me to Enoch to do a presentation. And if you tell me her name, she's got the Nubian look. And she took me to do a presentation, and she coached me on the first time I did a presentation in that region. And I remember I gave her everything I was talking about. She goes, no, flip that. Don't say that. Can't do that. No, put that in there. Yeah, do that. The whole thing, right? And then I remember she said, tell them the story about the sandal. I said, should I take that one out? She says, no, don't take that one out. Put that one in. Because the sandal's a funny story. And I started out with how my mother used to hit us with a sandal when we were kids, right? And the place just erupts. Like just pure laughter. Everybody goes, like, la, 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 la. He understands us, right? So there's moments where, and the only thing I want to emphasize with that is you got to look for those moments to connect. So be secure about who you are. Speak the way you speak. Be businesslike. But what was the gentleman's name that asked me the question?
Wasim. Wasim.
So Wasim, it's like, be professional, Wasim, but let a little personal Wasim come out, right? And then it's okay to share some stories. Find your moments within the presentation, because this usually comes across. When I've seen presenters in the region, most of them present like this. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Today I'm going to talk about, and they do this formal presentation. Then they got slides, right? Then they do this. They start reading the slides, the bullet points. Remember, never read bullet points, right? Never turn your back to the crowd and never read the bullet points. What people are looking for, though, look at the slides, but what they want is for you to give them that, what we'll call here in the US flavor. You got the essence, you got this great product, you got this great project, but what they want is what's in between. Here's how we think it would help, and then insert a little bit of humor. Be gentle on the humor, by the way, depending on where you're at. So I would be gentle with the humor, but people just want plain talk. Almost if you're like is it called a diwania? Where you're just kind of shishaing with somebody? Okay, so just kind of be formal, pretend you're shishaing with them visually, right? It's like a totally different environment, right? It's funny how much more conversation, and I'll say this I know for a fact, the more you're relaxed, the more your audience will relax. Keep that in mind.
Sweet. If you have time, Victor, I know we're running over the hour, but we have 2 more questions left if you have time. Okay. Hamid wants to know, how can you be the best audience member or buyer to this selling process?
What? How can you be? I don't know if I understand that question. How can you be the best audience member to the buyer? To the seller?
I would expect you would then, close the deal or agree to the sale. But he wanted to know what's the best buyer in this,
Oh, you're probably talking about the 4 types.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're talking about the 4 types of buyers. Okay, so we're going back to the 4 types of buyer. Here, somewhere, here, somewhere, here, somewhere. Like these types of buyer. The answer is not easy, but it depends who you have access to. Like I've seen people, when I ask people, like, and I won't do this to you because I'm going to do what I'm doing. If I say this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, which one do you think would be, see, now you won't do it because you know what I'm doing to you, right? But I would say it really depends. If I have access to management, I definitely want to start here. Starting down top, working down is always easiest. And it depends on the product. So let's walk through them. If I got a project that's very strategic, visionary, I want managers to buy in. If I got a technical solution, I definitely want the user and the technical buyer with me. I always consider the economic buyer last. This is the one I'll tell you is always last. Because if I get the user on my side or the technical buyer on my side, well, they're going to influence the manager, say, hey, we need to do this. And then the buyer will fall in place. And sometimes it's better to come in through the user and work your way up. But again, the ideal situation is come from the top and work your way down.
Great. And our last question is actually a question that I had. When we talk about persuasion, there's a lot of unconscious bias that people will come into a room with, especially if they don't know you and they don't have that trust established. Mm-hmm. Can unconscious bias overcome the persuasion? So if somebody doesn't like the way you look or the way you talk or something, is there a way to persuade them out of it, or does unconscious bias trump your sales methods and persuasion skills?
What a great question, because the bias is unconscious, they don't even know they have it. That's what's fascinating about it, right? They don't even know they have the bias. When I go to that part of the country, that part of the world rather, immediately people look at me like, you're not from here, especially the way I dress. Although sometimes I have been confused for Egyptian many times, right? But when it comes to unconscious bias, it really depends on what you think the bias is. I have a client I'm working with right now who has a heavy accent, right? Who has a heavy accent. And what we're working on is to talk about that accent early on in the conversation. So he's selling here in the US, he has a heavy accent. And he's very self-conscious of that accent. And I said, well, the only way to become comfortable with the accent, make yourself comfortable, make the audience comfortable, is to find a way to insert a story early on. And so, I don't want to bias anybody, so I won't tell you what country he's from. But what we said is like within the first 3-4 minutes, or 5 rather, why don't you tell a personal story and let them know where you're from and how you got here, and that you've been in business now for the last 13 years, and you think this is the greatest country in the world, something like that, right? And so he's going to try that this week. And I said, when you mention something like that, when you just say, here's who I am, you can break some of that. When I do presentations at Mela, you've seen this, Rodney, right? When I know that before I even start a presentation, every time I do this in Mela, remember the candy with the wrapper? The candy with the wrapper. And so I always show a candy with the wrapper on it, obviously. And I tell people, hey, take the wrapper off the candy. And I say, the candy represents your brain. The wrapper represents culture. Culture goes over the brain. And I say, I'll never understand your culture, but I always understand your brain. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Not your culture, but how people think. And people go, okay, he admitted he doesn't know our culture, right? And by me saying that and separating the two, people go, oh, so he's just going to talk about the brain. Yeah. And then you can figure out the culture piece. And people go, you can see people's attitudes just shift like, okay, that's fair. He acknowledges that. So sometimes in order to get rid of that bias, you just have to acknowledge that maybe you don't know as much as they do. Maybe they're in a better position to understand, but you're just going to give your perspective. So bottom line, if the conscious bias is there, our question is, how do we reframe the bias? That's the best way of putting it. So if I come from another country, goes, this American does not understand our culture. Then I just say, I don't. I'll never understand your culture. Love to, but I don't have the chance. You know, the most I understand is the shisha. That's it. I got it, right? And I joke about it, but I do understand the brain and how decisions are made. And people go, okay. And that's how I do it. I just admit it up front.
Okay. So you use more of a disarming approach.
Oh yeah, well, the thing is, but here's what happens psychologically. If you're weak at something, right, and you know it's going to come out. In other words, in my case, I don't understand your culture. You know it's there. You know it's floating in the room. He can say all he wants to say, but in the room, he doesn't get it. Understand? Then by just blocking that objection, by preempting the objection, I move it mentally out of the way, right? Like, by the way, salespeople, we got a bad rep. I said, look, if you're like many Americans, like 9 out of 10, you probably hate salespeople. So do I, because they always want to pressure you into buying something. I'm not going to do that. You're now talking to the 1 out of 10 who's not going to force you to buy anything. But let me walk you through what I have. Does that sound like a deal? And they're going to go, yeah. And believe it or not, I've taken away that unconscious bias. That's how I would do it.
Great. Thank you, Victor. I know we want to keep going, but we need to let you get back to work.
Are you done with all the
well.
questions?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for participating and bringing in all your questions. 1,000 thanks, Victor. We're looking forward to seeing you again.
All right.
Please, everyone, before you leave, fill out the survey in the chat. This session has been recorded and it'll be on the Mela YouTube channel in a few days as well. We'll also circulate Victor's book, the PDF. That'll be in our Global Network app resource center. So look for it there and stay tuned to Mela social channels for more upcoming events. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Victor. See you on the 11th.
Will do. Bye-bye. Oh, you're out here right now.
Amazing.
I'm here.